you, JeNai Redwood, for joining us today or joining me today. Actually, we've just started these portraits as a way for our community to get to know other families and students and leaders in our community. And so this is just an opportunity for us to have a discussion about, kind of who you are in the Charlotte community and the Charlotte prep community and your contributions to your workplace and the school and of course Charlotte City. So I just thought I would kind of start off by asking you a little bit about yourself, introducing yourself to Charlotte Prep. We know you have a lovely daughter who's in our ES, and so just kind of tell us a little bit about your family and your relationship to Charlotte Prep.
Sure. So, well, thank you for chatting with me today. This is a fun kind of treat in my day from corporate America to talk about the Charlotte Prep community and my family and my role there. So I'm a mom, obviously. I have a 5-year-old TK student at Charlotte Prep. This is our second year at the school. And it's been a wonderful experience up to this point. And I always tell people there really is a place for everyone at Charlotte Prep. Like that's what we have felt. I'm also a board member. So I just began my first year of a 3-year term on the board for Charlotte Prep. So I'm excited to be involved in that way to help shape and guide the future of the school. So that's a little bit about me.
Great. I mean, I think one of the really neat things about how close-knit the Charlotte Prep community is that you have so many opportunities to participate, and board participation is a really great one. I mean, you have the chance to really get to know leadership. You get to have that really great top-down view of sort of how the school operates and what real changes that we can make to better, the lives of the students and also, the families. So thank you so much for actually serving on our board. We talk about, diversity as one of the reasons why we want to have portraits and portraits of leadership and service and so on. And you are coming from a diverse background. And so part of what we wanted to talk about today is also just a little bit about, your professional life and your personal life and how, your diverse background has made an impact on your trajectory, right? So I thought I'd ask you, sort of who were your heroes growing up?
It's fun to think about that. And the first person that comes to mind is definitely my dad. He really instilled confidence in me and showed me that if you want something to happen, you can make it happen. You just have to start and take action. And he was involved in the community. He helped create access to healthcare and job training in my hometown of Minneapolis, Minnesota. He was very much involved in building the community and helping underserved community members with their needs. And so that's something that I learned about very early on. So he's definitely one of my heroes. And then someone that other people would maybe be more familiar with is Marian Wright Eidelman. She's the founder of the Children's Defense Fund. And I did have the opportunity to meet her. And her life's work is really focused on advocating and championing, I guess, policies and programs that lift children out of poverty. So the other thing that I feel like is so notable about her is that she's like the first of many things. She was the first woman elected as a member of the Yale University Corporation. She was the first Black woman admitted to the Mississippi Bar. She received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I mean, there's so many things that I could go on and on about her. And she has dedicated her life's work to helping impoverished children.
So this is a really interesting connection. Last time when we spoke, you were talking about being able to reach out to underserved populations and helping them with wealth and wealth management and money management and tools, to help them, have a more thriving livelihood here. So maybe we can just kind of link a little bit to sort of how you entered the banking sector and, you spoke about these two really important, heroes in your life, kind of what lessons you've taken from that and how that's played into your professional roles.
Yeah. So, my current employer was a client of mine prior to me joining. And so I had an idea about the culture and the caliber of people before I joined.
Mhm.
I don't know that I was necessarily focused on getting into financial services, but I did feel a connection to the culture. And so today I lead employee relations in the United States for my company, as well as lead a team of human resource generalists that support our mid-level managers across the company. So it's a smaller team for a company that I work for of the size that we have. It's about 140 people, and you know it's uh, it's really rewarding because my team touches so many employees and can really impact their lives, but also the lives of the people that they lead. So you have maybe 20,000 like mid-level managers, and they're responsible for really driving out the strategy in all aspects of a really large international company. And so it's an important job, and I think the folks that work with those managers feel a great sense of responsibility, especially in this kind of time. I mean,
Mhm.
you are expected to be leading and positive, and the dynamics are changing. Maybe you're leading remotely for the first time, and then you also have your own self that you have to care for.
Right.
So, to be able to provide that kind of support and guidance for people, I think is important.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can stop for a second and just acknowledge that COVID has just changed even leadership roles slightly,
Mhm.
right? I mean, having to really think about how you function in your role for your company, but also what impact, as you mentioned, you have on the surrounding community. What else can you or your team or even your company do to really help people, right? I mean, at
Yeah,
this point, people are really struggling and, financially, but also just in terms of health and their, social circles in their lives. And so being a large company in a town like Charlotte that's changing a lot anyway, trying to be a leader and be visible in terms of health, it seems like a really important role for all of you.
yeah, it is. I mean, there are things like, and a lot of companies have done this, is just being able to provide PPE to the communities and people that may not have access. I mean, we've done that all over the country. And it may seem like, what do you mean people can't get a mask or they can't? I mean, there are people that do not have access. And it's just so important, I think, to stay grounded in what is happening um, in your own community, but really across the country and the world. We're fortunate in our Charlotte Prep community where we probably aren't thinking about some of those things day to day.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that's it's and again, that's kind of why we really try to have conversations like this is sort of opening and broadening our perspective a little bit about. Obviously, there's some very important immediate things that are happening right now, but they are representative of a lot of other challenges that most communities are facing. Right, where there are marginalized sections of the population, there are areas, physical areas of our community that need attention in terms of infrastructure and growth. And while a K-8 school is like pretty young to notice or to understand how important those are, I mean, the hope is that we as a community we start to understand some of those challenges and then think about what are ways that even our kids can think about either solutions or thinking about how they can get involved, right? So this pandemic, interestingly enough, has really laid bare, right,
Mhm.
um, a lot of strife, right, a lot of tension, and I think a lot of, I mean, areas of improvement is to say it lightly, but I think that's really if we are able to, within our bubbles, like try to understand, I mean, these conversations are so important for that, really.
Yeah. And I think too, Sharina, it's important to understand that what's happening in marginalized communities and acknowledge that well over 30 million Americans live in poverty. That's a lot of people.
It is a lot of people. And this is such an interesting statistic. I mean, when we talked last time and I was telling you that we've lived in a number of other places in the world, and which were, and in some respect are still considered sort of developing countries, right? Mm-hmm. And there's this level of acceptance about, I think, poverty levels, particularly in places like South America and so on, because we're getting there, we're improving, we're getting to a point where we're competitive economically and we're known in the world and on the world stage. But to realize that my home country, which is certainly considered one of the most developed nations, certainly, in terms of industry and economy, to know that number is a really shocking fact. And so that gap has widened, which I think is one of the reasons why, in your position, you are looking to try and lead and try and narrow that gap.
Yes.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that financial services industry wasn't necessarily the first thing that you had thought of when you were entering, but I'm curious, as you did enter this industry, again, knowing a little bit more about sort of the I think the influences of the influencers in your life. Mm-hmm. As a woman and as a Black American and as a mom, if you could talk a little bit about sort of, your rise and trying to, set a path for yourself in a pretty competitive industry, certainly, and what that journey has been like for you.
Yeah. I am really fortunate to work for an amazing company. And it has been so rewarding and given me so much in return for as much as I've given the company as well. I think I'll start at the beginning, and I tell a lot of people this younger and earlier in their career that, number one, delivering results are table stakes, period. You have to perform consistently at a high level, and it has to be sustained. And no one can argue with your results. I mean, I think that is the first order of business, because it's not about me as a woman. It's not about me as a Black woman. No one can argue with the results. Mm-hmm. And so you have to start there. I think people have to really focus on that. Then I think it's about building relationships and finding commonality with all kinds of people. I didn't do this all by myself, and others won't either. I had people along the way to give me new and exciting opportunities, to give me exposure, to maybe even put me in positions where I maybe wouldn't think I was ready or that I was even interested in. And so that has been really helpful. I also think that when you are performing and a top performer, you have leverage.
Sure.
You get to use your voice and advocate for yourself and for others. And so it's really about that for me. It's not single-mindedness about what do I get out of it, but how can I use that to help others? I mentioned Minnesota earlier, talking about my dad. And so I was born and raised in Minneapolis, and it's not a place that's really known for its diversity. So there were more times, often than where I was like the only girl at that time. I was a girl, or person of color in the room. But I think those early experiences prepared me to navigate corporate America. I mean, it is still very male dominated. I try to use my perspective and influence to educate others. So
you describe that as a kind of allyship for others in your
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's too just about helping people see a different perspective. And so, when I was supporting clients in an HR executive capacity, oftentimes they were men and they had a wife or a partner to be able to pick up the slack. And we had a great relationship, and I would tease them, I am the wife, I am the executive, I am the leader, I am the mother. And so that's the same thing goes for people on your team. So think about that dynamic and don't compare, is someone working how you work? What's the end result? Are you getting the end result?
Right.
Everyone has to take a different path to get there. And so I think it was just illuminating sometimes for me to share that with them.
Yeah, I do think that I feel, and again, this might be in this pandemic year where we've had to really think harder about accommodation, right, and flexibility, and of course that's a lot of that is circumstances. But one of the sort of horrifying outcomes of this year is also that so many women, whether they are in leadership positions or not, are not going to be able to return to their places of work and to fulfill that side of their lives because they're maybe not offered those flexible options, or that the pressure to maintain the balance and the family life and so on is just so immense. And so really this has significant, the leveraging that you spoke about, right? And the focus on trying to, accept other people's processes because, if you're result oriented, right? Like that's how we're going to further this, the company goals or the group goals and so on. But, a lot of that actually, I think we're seeing now that, there's sometimes very little bandwidth to make those accommodations. And I don't use the word accommodation lightly. I think what you're talking about is inviting all kinds of perspectives and ways of accomplishing things and doing things. And so I wonder, now with just looking into the future, we have no crystal ball, but looking into the future and thinking about the fact that our marginalized communities, which include many women and women of color, what we need to do in order to secure their future in a pandemic economy, right? I mean, that's something I'm thinking you probably are having to deal with in your role right now.
Absolutely. I mean, if you my dentist is in Uptown Charlotte, and I went. It was maybe a month and a half ago, and I hadn't been uptown in months. And you could just see all the businesses that were closed. And it's so many different kinds of people having a hard time.
Yeah.
And so if let's say you were a successful business owner and this pandemic has really impacted you, but then layer on top, if you are in a marginalized community, your options for employment are minimal, or you are in a client kind of public facing job where your exposure to the virus is that much greater. And then you layer on top, maybe you don't have access to a ton of healthcare, or you make the choice of, am I going to feed my family or go to this doctor's appointment? And I know that is, I think for some people, really hard to understand people making those kinds of choices, because by and large, people that are going to watch this aren't making those choices.
Right.
That is the reality of what's happening. And so that's why I just continue to kind of think about everyone really understanding what is happening in these communities, and that it's not just cities, it's small towns, it's rural areas. It's people of every race, and to think about how this pandemic, and just even day to day without the pandemic, people are impacted.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's again, it's that idea of like, we have to really be able to burst out of the bubble, and really, I think help educate ourselves on what are like even the tiniest of things that we can do to reach some of those marginalized communities, which is tough in a pandemic, right? Because people are afraid of lots of things at the moment, I think. The anxiety is definitely high for sure. So I just wanted to kind of circle around back to, just leadership and, again, the idea of, well, I'll put it this way, like, if you ever really thought of yourself as a natural leader, I mean, it seems like a lot of things that you're talking about, again, the influence from your childhood and thinking about sort of how to serve community. And I think what's interesting is that sometimes financial services isn't always seen as, a great linkage to community. But if you could talk a little bit about sort of how you, found your rhythm as a leader and sort of, what has pushed you to pursue those opportunities and how you feel you might be trying to even change, the trajectory of financial services as an industry in terms of helping communities.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So have I always thought of myself as a natural leader? I've actually been in leadership roles for as long as I can remember. And it first showed up when I started playing sports.
Okay.
A young girl. And so I was often the captain of the team or, picked to mentor other teammates. And I didn't realize at the time that it was a leadership role.
Right.
I was just excited to be on the team and happy to help. And sure, I'll be the captain. I mean, it was, I was a kid, it all sounded great. Yeah. And so really though, I look back and it was those early experiences of being a team captain that, I really built up my confidence and helped me connect to my natural leadership capabilities. In sports, you learn about teamwork, you learn about defeat, setbacks, mental and physical discipline. And so it was such a great experience for me to be part of all the various teams that I was on and all the different sports that I was involved in. And I'm really passionate about that for my own daughter. I was so disappointed she was just starting T-ball and then the pandemic hit. Like I was like, all right, girl, we got to get you into sports. And there's a lot of research actually about women who play sports and leadership and future kind of success in their lives. So I really thought about that and have been thinking about that a lot now that I have a daughter of my own. And I guess what really pushes me to continue to lead is helping my team be their best, most productive selves and being in service of others. Like for me, like in my career now, I have the ability to help direct the trajectory of people's real lives. Like I hire a lot of people, I can promote people and help create real economic mobility and opportunity for people. That is really why I lead, because I get to make decisions and those decisions can impact people.
Yeah, I think it's so the key thing that you said there was about economic mobility, right? And I think, being able to lift people out of, their circumstances if they need to and giving them that chance, right? I mean, I think that's so much of what, we talk so much about the American dream. And I think it's just a human dream, right? Like that everybody wants to be able to either better themselves or be able to, have some place in society, right? To be noticed, to be needed, and that's difficult if they have economic and challenges in their own lives, and that's why I wanted to bring that circle around to financial services, because I do think that there's probably some misconception about that particular industry as being, servicing a very small piece of the pie, right? Sure, everybody engages at some point with, whether they have a bank account or, whether they are investment, but I do think that that has that that connotation, right? That like this is really reserved for people who actually have, have money.
Right.
But I think that by leading, people within the company economic mobility, they also have stories, right? Like they have stories that they can share when they speak with clients, when they talk with people who come through to meet with them, and so on. It's just having that opportunity to share their story of mobility is also really important, and building that trust. So much of what I think that you're involved in has to do with authenticity, right? Like being able to really share, kind of an experience and give confidence to that person who's on the receiving end that they also have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, and volunteerism is a big part of the culture of my company, and being active in our community. I mean, we allow people a certain number of hours to volunteer every month, and it's been really difficult in the pandemic, like you mentioned earlier. You can't get out and be in person in the same ways that people are accustomed to, but the needs are still there or greater. So I do think, people sometimes think of financial services one way, but there's so much that, a lot of companies in Charlotte, whether it be financial services or not, are trying to offer back to the community. It's also a business imperative. I mean, it's what clients are interested in.
Sure.
What is your economic, social kind of mobility? What is your platform? I mean, clients in different companies are interested in what are you doing to make the world better?
Absolutely. What's the impact that they can create, right? I always think about that sort of pebble in the pond, right? Like what's the one, sort of drop that you can make that then creates that ripple effect across the community. And so I also wonder, how that sort of pebble in the pond relates to also, your either team members or colleagues who come from diverse backgrounds, if they feel or if they sense that systems are changing in that people in the pond way so that they are able to have a voice. I mean, you talked about leveraging your position, but do you sort of see also a culture changing with the new leaders that you're bringing up, and whether or not they're able to, see themselves as change makers?
I do. I think systems are changing. I think slowly. It's you hear about like more seats at the table or things like that, right? And intellectually, I think that makes sense. It's more seats, more voices, better ideas, different experiences, so you can formulate the best solutions for whatever challenges that you're tackling. But I do still think emotionally for people, it could feel like seats are being taken away and not added. So I just challenge everyone, if that feeling ever creeps in, I think we have to really ask ourselves, what's driving that feeling? What are we actually scared of? If we're saying we're going to bring more seats, but emotionally you're feeling like seats are being taken away. And
have you? I'm curious if either you personally or you feel like anyone around you has faced that dilemma, because I do think, I mean, right now, and not that we need to go into a lot of political discussion, but obviously we are seeing some fractures, just in communities in terms of exactly this point of, being able to launch yourself into a leadership role does require, people to advocate for you, people to, serve as allies and so on. But I still, there seems to be this sort of division and this, again, I think, an unfortunate assumption that it's a 0 or 1 proposition, right? Like if I'm going to include more people, which is what we're trying to do, right? When we talk about inclusion, we're talking about having members at the table who represent, right, like the makeup of the rest of the world or the rest of our community. And so, what do you think that we can do to combat that sense of 0 or 1, that sense of all or none, or kind of how do we help people to really think inclusively?
Yeah, it's really a tough.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But I think part of it is about education and educating yourself. In looking, like lifting your head up and looking around and seeing what happens and trying to get different perspectives. It doesn't mean you have to agree at all. But I do think it's so important that people are actively educating themselves on what is happening in the country, and trying to see things from a different point of view. I think you've become a lot less closed off if you can do that, and more balanced in your approach. I think it's just easy to not be engaged.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think on that note of engagement, I know that you were included as a top executive that showcased in Executive Leadership Council's. They had a recent publication, Black Excellence Matters, and this is one form of education, right? Like this is a publication that goes out. People actually see, names and faces that really are coming to the forefront of corporate leadership and community service and so on. So I wondered, I think it's a really important point what you made about educating ourselves and understanding sort of what are the different perspectives. And the ELC is one collective group of very different perspectives. What do you named in that? What do you hope to accomplish as a ELC recognized leader?
Yeah. So, some people may not have heard of the ELC. It's the Executive Leadership Council, and their focus is on increasing representation of Black executives, specifically in the C-suite and CEO, in the CEO office, and in boardrooms. And, some people may say, well, why is that necessary? Because there are still too few of us in some of those roles. And there are a ton of people out there that are qualified to do a lot of different things. And I think that's part of it, is just bringing visibility to talent.
Right.
And so as a C-suite graduate myself, like I have the obligation to help and mentor individuals probably earlier in their career on how to grow, and use the tools that I learned to continue to propel me closer to what my goals are as well. But I think everything that I try to do is really, again, in service of others.
Yeah, I think that's, I love that is your mantra, and that's so much of the foundation of every endeavor that you're making. And I'm you have a young daughter, and I'm sure that that's something that you're going to try to instill, in her as she moves through life. You brought up sports, and you brought up, sort of where are the opportunities where someone can rise, whether that's as a young person, or, someone who's had some experience like yourself and can be visible in a community. And I think, bringing it round back to sort of Charlotte Prep a little bit, one of the, one of the key pillars for us is about leadership, and what our students can do, first of all, inside their community, what they can do for each other, and so I think it's really important to hear voices like yours, for them to really, first of all, put a name to a face to see what success in leadership looks like and how that has manifested for you. But I wonder, kind of what are the things that we can impart, especially for, some of our middle schoolers as they start to think about, moving on, and, what they'd like, what kind of imprint they want to make on the next stage of their, educational career. sort of what are the challenges and what that future might look like for them. What advice can you give them? I mean, I know you imparted a little bit here and there, but what are those like really important messages they absolutely need to hear?
Yeah, so I think the future is so bright for our students and young people in general. I would say that real leaders aren't afraid of a challenge. A leader's true reward is seeing other people benefit from their teachings. I would encourage our young leaders to give of themselves, their time, and it really will come back to you twofold. And then the other thing is just back to the point around educating yourself, understanding what's happening in marginalized communities, and think about investments of resources and time. I mean, it's basic things in some of these communities is access to healthy food. It's access to healthcare. It's job training, mentorship, financial literacy. That is a big one for me. If you grow up in poverty and you're able to make it out, and Charlotte has a very tough mountain to climb in that perspective, that if you're in poverty, it's very hard to get out here in Charlotte. But if you do make it out and you start making a living wage, you actually have no idea what to do with that money, how to manage that money, you don't know what credit is, how to build it, why it's important. And so families like mine and so many others at Charlotte Prep, our children learn so much just through living with us and in our day-to-day lives. In a marginalized community, it often just comes down to survival. You're learning how to survive as opposed to what our kids are being taught directly or indirectly. Our children are being taught and learning how to thrive. Right. And how do you take, what you have innately and also have been given and share it with others? I mean, I really think I would love to see our young leaders have more of a service-oriented kind of mindset and action, and to really be focused on putting things out into the world.
Right.
Not expecting anything in return, but that the reward is what you put back out. And you'll be so surprised at what you actually will get back.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I think that's it's a challenge for younger kids to see that, because it takes time, and I think that to add to that is just having patience and really, I think just like believing in yourself, right? Like that you have time to have that education, and you have time to make those connections even as early as, right, like a first grader, a second grader. You have that time right now, which is such a gift. I think, when my parents immigrated here to the US, kind of their focus was so much on success and providing, right, for their child, and it's a huge gamble to go to a place you aren't from, that you don't know anyone, that you in a sense don't necessarily belong. It's a huge gamble. So much of that focus has been on well, in a way, themselves, right? Like, I mean, that almost comes first. And then, it leaves very little room to start thinking about everything around, right? Like that pond around you, and what's the moment that you can throw that stone in the pond and really make that impact, and not having that, sort of level of cognizance of what is happening, that kind of can stay for a long time, especially as an adult. It can be sometimes difficult to make those huge shifts in mindset, right? And to invite those perspectives in, which is so much about what the work, for example, that you're doing, is about, is really like trying to help make that shift. But as a young person, you're a sponge, right? Like you have so much time, and you have a lot of room to invite those perspectives, and to invite opportunities for service and recognition of others' plight, like the plight of folks around you and your community around you. So yeah, and I think those are like amazing words to send out to our community, and so I just wanted to say thank you, obviously, for sharing a little bit about yourself and about your inspirations and sort of the work that you're doing, and I think I'm hopeful that these kind of conversations will help our families and our students, and also our leadership within the school to think about kind of how our community can really engage more. Try to do that work from inside out and think about what's the ripple effect that we can make. So I really appreciate your time, JeNai. It was really special to have a parent and a leader and a board member really kind of bring it all together for us. So I just wanted to ask if you have any other parting words of wisdom for us.
I don't know, wisdom. I think I was thinking about like, what is it that I want to talk about? And I've talked about a lot of different things, except for this last thing. And I do think that people need to understand and hear that everyone wants to be seen. And I think you said that earlier, and that representation matters. Like every child has the right to dream and believe that they can do and be whatever they want to. And it's really that simple. I mean, that's what it really is about. If you can't see it, you can't achieve it. It makes it very difficult. And so it's not about exclusivity, but about being inclusive, right? I mean, I want my daughter to see Black women in positions of power and influence because it's still far too uncommon. I mean, it's important for her to say, oh, I could do that. Like there's something innate in humans that you relate to something that, oh, looks like you.
Sure. Yeah.
And so it's so important that people understand what it's really about. It's really about the human condition.
Absolutely.
Right? It's about just a person. It's about just having a hope and a dream and a desire. And so that is, I think, the last thing that I would want to share.
Well, that was actually incredibly wise. So yes, you did impart some wisdom for us. But yeah, thank you so much for that. And yeah, I'm hopeful that we get these messages across. And it takes time and it takes repetition, but voices like yours will help. Certainly.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so fun. I love talking with you.
Yes, me too. Thanks so much.
All right. Take care.